Hello and welcome to Essence News. I, Ujjwal Agarwal, feels honored to have the former Rajya Sabha MP, advisor to the Chief Minister of Bihar, Mr. Nitish Kumar, and national spokesperson of JDU on our show with yet another exclusive interview. Yes, none other than Mr. Pawan Verma. Thank you so much, sir, for this interview.
My pleasure.
Sir, let me start by asking you, sir, since Mr. Modi has become the leader of a country, or I would rather say the Prime Minister of a country, so don't you think that there has been massive increase in the ceasefire violations at the India-Pakistan border?
Certainly, the month of January this year has seen an exponential increase not only in ceasefire violations by the Pakistani army, but on jihadi infiltrations and attacks on our army camps as well as civilian casualties. This is very worrisome because somehow when the government did come to power, Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself had said that he would take a much tougher stand, a more decisive, bold, retaliatory stand against such Pakistani adventurism. And in particular, the surgical strike which had taken place earlier was hailed and projected as something that would put an end to these kind of incursions and infiltrations and violations. But the situation has not improved, and the reasons for that are obvious. Would you like me to elaborate on the reasons?
Sir, if you could.
I think first and foremost, there appears to be the lack of a strategic policy. There is no contradiction necessarily between talks with Pakistan and a robust policy of military retaliation which teaches Pakistan that it cannot get away with this kind of terroristic and military adventurism against India. The important point is that all policy must be embedded in a strategic matrix and part of a policy framework. One of the impediments to that is that the current government in Jammu Kashmir consists of two alliance partners, the PDP and the BJP. And while they have come together to form a government, on most policy matters, they don't see eye to eye and so in a sense are pulling in opposite directions. So on the one hand, the local government is constantly embroiled in its internal contradictions. On the other hand, I think the central government lacks a strategic policy towards Pakistan. Let me tell you that Pakistan's policy to India is absolutely clear: explosive aggression and tactical appeasement. Our policy seems to be constantly responding to one or the other. In other words, it is ad hoc rather than one based on a strategic policy which anticipates Pakistani action, plans for the rebuttal, and in fact proactively deals with Pakistan without completely eliminating the possibility of talks or of military retaliation, because the two are not in contradiction. Also, there is strategic ambivalence. We say we will not talk to Pakistan unless terrorism stops. But we have evidence, which is not disclaimed by the government, that the two most significant points people of both governments, that is the national security advisors, are already meeting in Southeast Asia and having talks. So are we having talks or are we not having talks? It is not clear. So therefore, whether it's Pakistan or it's China or any other country, what India, which is the land of Chanakya, which is based on strategic planning, lacks this. And that is why I think partly we are in this predicament.
Sir, even though China has discarded the beliefs of Mao Zedong, so don't you think India still battles to root out Maoist or Naxalism attached to the tribal belt called the Red Corridor?
I think Naxalism poses a serious danger, but you must remember that the Indian state is sufficiently resilient and powerful to accommodate such insurgencies. In fact, let me say to you that in spite of many insurgencies across the country, including in Punjab at the time of the Khalistan movement, no insurgency has ever succeeded against the Indian state since 1947. Now, as far as Naxalism is concerned, any movement that seeks to obtain through violence and by a rejection of the Constitution of India needs to be dealt with firmly. Equally, governments must understand, state and central, that the root problems that are responsible for the rise of Naxalism, which is poverty, which is malnutrition, which is marginalization, which is oppression, which is exploitation, need to be also tackled. In other words, the biggest antidote to insurgencies like that led by the Naxalites in the Red Corridor is economic development,
Right.
social equality, opportunity, education, better health. So the state has to work on both fronts. And that is the challenge that we have to face with the Naxalites.
Sir, it's more than 70 years that we've got rid of the British rule. Sir, we got independence in the year 1947, but do you think that even still India is facing this so-called colonial form of government?
There are many laws in the government which are a legacy of colonial rule. They need to be reviewed and made more congruent to the needs not only of independent India but of the Indian ethos. That requires administrative change. We have had several administrative reforms commissions. They have made recommendations. But to carry out this change in a sustained and effective manner requires, I think, concentration of aims by the government,
Right.
which whether it is this government or previous governments, somehow is still lacking. So, while there are many things that we have to be grateful to the British for having given to India at the administrative level, there are many more things that we need to change, especially in administrative procedures and antiquated and outdated laws. That effort has still got to be made.
But it's more than 4 years. In fact, this is the last year of the BJP government. We can't see the last year, in fact. We can even see him in the next year in the general elections as well. But, sir, don't you think that 4 years or rather 5 years is more than enough to bring about administrative changes in the constitution?
I think the BJP government or the NDA government now more accurately cannot constantly harp to the weaknesses or failures of previous governments because they have been in power now for 4 years. But one thing you must realize is that when you have a functioning democracy, change is enduring when it happens, but to bring that change requires more time because you have to build a consensus. There are many competing constituencies, many vested interests which need to be tackled not by fiat but through a process of consultation and the building of a consensus. Therefore, it takes more time, although I agree with you that we need to expedite the pace.
Sir, what do you have to say about the current Maldives political crisis? Because, sir, China is constantly supporting Maldives in its infrastructural projects, developments, and it is also looking forward to build a base in the Maldives after leasing out one land under the liberalized leasing scheme brought by the Maldives government. So, don't you think that this should worry India regarding its relation with China?
Of course, it should worry India because just like Pakistan has a consistent policy towards India, so does China. China's policy is engagement with containment. It seeks to engage with India but wants to contain India at the same time. One of the instruments that it uses to contain India is to encircle India and reduce its influence in our own sphere of influence, which is our hinterland, which includes the Maldives.
Right.
So China's attempt is, whether it's in Nepal or in Bhutan or certainly Pakistan, where it is an all-weather friend, or Sri Lanka and now Maldives, and even in Bangladesh and Myanmar, to encircle India with what is called the theory of the string of pearls. By increasing Chinese influence, and Maldives, where it is located, although it is a small country with a population of not more than 500,000 people, it has a very great strategic significance. It straddles the maritime lanes of the Indo-Pacific route, and for China to have a military base there or a naval facility there is a direct threat to us in our own area of strategic influence. So we need therefore to be far more vigilant about what China is up to. I don't believe we have had our eye on the ball, as it were, to use the cricket terminology, as far as Maldives is concerned. In my view, the crisis in Maldives was escalating for a period of time. We needed to have kept in touch with both sides of the divide,
Which we didn't.
and perhaps didn't do as proactively as we should have, and also reinforced and strengthened the economic and other ties with Maldives so that we are a counterbalancing factor to what China is planning to do there. Let me give you an example. When this crisis broke, the Maldives wanted to send an envoy to India. Saudi Arabia, Pakistan and China. The first country where the envoy would have gone would have been India. Now, I don't question the government's decision because perhaps I am not privy to all the information they have. But as someone who is in touch with diplomacy, I wonder whether our decision to say no to that envoy was right or wrong. Firstly, if the envoy did come, it's not necessary that he or she should have been received at the level of the Prime Minister. Perhaps not even at the level of the External Affairs Minister. What do we have ministers of state for? Why do we have a foreign secretary or the other two secretaries in the Ministry of External Affairs? The envoy could have been met, and even if we had to convey to the envoy a message that we are dissatisfied with the manner in which the current government is running the show there, that envoy could have been used to convey an unequivocal message from us while keeping up a point of contact with Maldives. So there are nuances to diplomacy. You can have a different point of view, but certainly it requires application of mind. And when that is not there, you take ad hoc decisions.
So, but do you think with this rapid increase of Chinese influence and extremism, do you think that the Indian government should infiltrate our troops to Maldives?
This analogy with what happened in 1989, or was it 1988, when there was a coup in the Maldives and the Indian government sent their troops. As it so happened at that time, I was a young deputy secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, and I flew to the Maldives in an Air Force plane one day after our troops landed. At that time, the situation was different. There, a legitimate government was being attacked by mercenaries who had come from Sri Lanka, and the legitimate government, the then president who had managed to escape, Gayoom, was asking the Indian government to come and help them. This time, the legitimate government has not asked us. A leader in exile in Sri Lanka is saying, please go ahead. Also, to blindly repeat what you did in the past without taking into account changed circumstances and also the role other countries are now more proactively playing in the region, including China, is to try to repeat the past without taking into account the changes that have taken place in the intervening 3 decades. So I don't believe that that should have been a reflex reaction. And even the gung-ho, somewhat driven by bravado strategists who say this is what India should have done, I believe are not taking into account all the factors and the differences between now and then.
So, what do you have to say about the current conflict, or not the current conflict, the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine? What step must India take in the current, the going on Israel-Palestine conflict? Because the governor of Manipur, Ms. Hetula, just said in an article that it is only India who can bring to an end with this conflict or the controversy.
What Najma Heptullah ji says, I think I welcome as a sign of her personal optimism, but I think it's a bit euphoric. Many other countries with much bigger stakes in the region have tried, but there are some intrinsic reasons why the conflict cannot be ended merely by one goodwill visit or merely by the intention to resolve it. It's a much deeper problem. As far as Indian policy to that region is concerned, we have very important strategic relations with Israel in the areas of defense technology, technology transfer, agriculture, scientific cooperation. Israel has stood with India on many occasions when we needed it. It's a source of vital technology and arms. There is a natural affinity also in many ways between Israel and India. You will find that my neighbor in one of the countries where I was ambassador was the Israeli ambassador. He said after school, most of our children take a 1-year break and half of them come to India to travel. There is a certain affinity to India. So we have vital relations there, which we must strengthen, we must reinforce. We established diplomatic relations with Israel in 1992, and this is the first prime ministerial visit that has taken place.
Yes.
Which to my mind is a far too long a gap. As far as Palestine is concerned, we stand with the just cause of the Palestine and an independent, sovereign and sustainable Palestine state. So the two are in some ways at the superficial level contradictory, but they are not for a country like India. And I think this government has played it well. Our Prime Minister went, we had the return visit of the Israeli Prime Minister. Simultaneously, a little later, our Prime Minister has gone to Palestine. And also earlier, we had the President of Palestine visit India. So, in a sense, we have good relations with both. But our strategic relations with Israel should not be held hostage to our moral position of the support of the Palestinian people, because no other country does diplomacy like this. Diplomacy is about enlightened national self-interest, which must be pursued as far as possible in consonance with principle, but also in consonance with national self-interest.
Sir, China has been constantly building dams on the 4 rivers that flow from China to India. So, do you think that this flow will adversely affect the water flow in India? What is your opinion on that? What should India do to evade such kind of building of dams on the 4 rivers?
There is always a certain conflict between upper riparian states and lower riparian states. Rivers don't know international boundaries.
Right.
We have the same problem between India and Pakistan as we have, for instance, with the Brahmaputra, between China and India. Now, a certain responsibility falls on both sides of this, the upper riparian strait and the lower riparian strait. I think we should be exceptionally focused in conveying to China that ultimately ecology, which is a trans-boundary problem. It's a problem that could affect even the upper riparian state.
Right.
and that countries need to be cooperative on such matters, take into account the consequences of what they are doing in their part of the territory that may come upon countries which are on the lower riparian side, which are as part of the river as it flows into the next territory. So this is a matter which needs to become an important talking point with China, and we should pursue it.
Sir, China has blamed Dalai Lama for provoking the people in Tibet against China, and after that, the Indian government is giving shelter to Mr. Dalai Lama in Dharamshala. So, do you think that some way or the other it will impact the relation of India and China?
Dalai Lama fled. His Holiness Dalai Lama fled from China, and India has a policy of giving refuge. We have conveyed to China that the presence of His Holiness the Dalai Lama is not political, that we treat him as a religious leader, and we have a right to give him refuge. And China's hypersensitivity on this issue is unwarranted. In fact, China can be very intrusive as far as this is concerned, and we should not bow down to that pressure. If His Holiness goes to Arunachal Pradesh, China protests. If our Prime Minister goes to Arunachal Pradesh, China protests. If citizens of Arunachal Pradesh want a visa to visit China, they say we will give stapled visas. Why do we take this without protesting? In my view, when China said that they will give stapled visas to citizens of Arunachal Pradesh, our response should have been that we will give stapled visas to Chinese of Tibetan origin. That would have been a response of a major country responding to unwarranted intrusion and aggression by a neighbor.
Sir, since 2014, Mr. Modi has done several tours to the foreign countries, to the superpowers, Russia, US, and many other countries. So, do you think that have brought any positive changes into our relations with the foreign countries?
I think that Prime Minister Modi's visit have been useful. In my view, whenever the Prime Minister of India visits a foreign country, irrespective of which political party is in power in India, it furthers our diplomatic relations because it reinforces ties with those countries. Certainly, Prime Minister Modi has shown a great deal of activism in foreign policy in the number of visits he's had abroad. Perhaps when he's abroad, he's also overly concerned with the impact on the NRI populations and events relating with them. But it is something that we must give him credit for. But the real question to ask is, what is the extent of light in the generation of so much heat? Is it furthering strategic interests or is it not? If, for instance, while the Chinese president is visiting India and Prime Minister Modi and the Chinese president are having a swing on a jhula along the Sabarmati and enjoying good Gujarati food, there is an incursion into Indian territory from China, as happened, then merely having an activism in foreign policy cannot hide the fact that underlying it, ultimately, as I keep pointing out, you have to bear in mind that strategic thinking, planning and policies cannot be substituted by merely ad hoc foreign policy activism. Right. You have to understand that. I am a student of Chanakya. I have written a book on Chanakya. And so therefore I place a great deal of emphasis on strategic planning.
Thank you so much, sir, for this interview. After coming up with exclusive interviews with Mr. Pawan Verma, Ms. Sheila Dikshit ji, Mr. Gaurav Gagoi and Mr. Rakesh Singh, Essence will be back with yet another exclusive interview of another personality very soon. Thank you.